Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 306 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm delighted to catch up again with Lesley Simpson-Gray, who has an MA in Integrative Child and Adolescent Psychotherapy, a diploma in Therapeutic Application of the Arts, a diploma in Therapeutic Life Story Work, a certificate in Cyber Psychotherapy, a diploma in Virtual Reality Exposure Therapy. She's also a master's level graduate in racism and black issues in the therapeutic process, and also she studied in the Nubia Wellness and Healing African-centered child development from prenatal adolescence, raising the bar on cultural competency. Today, Lesley is going to talk to us about a lecture she has delivered for the Counsellor CPD Library on the topic of unmasking neurodivergence and ethnicity using digital tools. So with that said, it's over to you, Ken.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees Oakes and Ken Kelly.
We are so delighted you've joined us for episode 306 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. My name is Ken. I'm here with Rory, and we are so glad that you've joined us for our 3 stops on the journey of counselling today, starting off with that ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be speaking about detecting suicidality, essential guides for counsellors, and something has changed that is really worth your attention on this, so stick around for that. We're going to then go on to Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where Rory met up with Lesley Simpson-Gray, as he's mentioned in the intro, so you want to be here for that unmasking neurodivergence and ethnicity using digital tools. And then we stop off at student services, and in real time of kind of at this going out, students may be coming to the end of their academic year, and we're going to be speaking today about tutor feedback. And, you know, generally when we think about tutor feedback, we think of the tutor feeding back to us, but this is about you giving your tutors feedback. So we're flipping that around. So stick around for that one. But let's start off, Rory, with our ethical, sustainable practice, detecting suicidality. Have I said that right?
You have, Ken. Thank you.
Okay.
You have. And, you know, we started off with a bit of levity, but this is a very serious topic. And through the arc of our practices, certainly through the arc of my practice, I have met clients who were considering taking their own life. And, you know, having to work with that and having to kind of support them in that kind of existential struggle. I don't mean I support people taking their own life. I mean, support them at kind of investigating the options. And one of the very interesting things that has come out recently regarding, you know, counsellors working with clients who may be thinking of taking their own life is that there's been a move away from what we call tool-based risk assessments. Now, I'm going to be really clear that right at the beginning of this, you know, if you're working as a practitioner, you should do some suicidal risk assessment training. You know, there's lots you can do, but I think it's essential. I did mine and many years ago, and I topped it up a few years ago. Really, really important because, you know, we're talking life and death here. But previously, what would have happened is that on intake forms, counsellors may very well have gone down a tick box route. In other words, they may have asked the clients a few questions and ticked a box, and some, things like PHQ-9, and done a weighted score, and then come out with a result and said, well, it looks like you may be, there may be a risk there, and it might take your own life. And sometimes it just kind of stops there. And what's happened is, certainly the medical profession has driven this. They've said, actually, that's really not good enough. What we need to do is we need to have a shift away from what we call prediction-based risk assessment towards an increased emphasis on therapeutic engagement. I'm quoting from the BACP Good Practice in Action Guide 126, which came out in April 2023. And what they're basically saying is that we have to engage with clients who may very well be thinking of taking their own life. It's not good enough to say, well, that's kind of their decision, and we need to leave it with them. What we need to do is work with that within the therapeutic relationship. It really is a shift away from just doing a weighted score and saying, well, on the face of it looks like there's going to be some risk. It puts the onus on us as practitioners to do the work, to get ourselves skilled in working with clients who may be on the cusp of taking their own life, and to think about how we work with that. And it's quite a big piece of work, because it actually links into supervision, and also, do we break confidentiality? It's quite a big piece of work, and one that needs a lot of thinking about, Ken.
Definitely. And back to CPD and training. You mentioned your CPD and training and topping that up again. And I think that's really important. You're mentioning that good practice guide as well. And that is CPD, kind of reading those documents that are provided by our ethical organizations. If you were a member of the Counsellor CPD library, we have a number of lectures on this very topic, and we also have some lectures on assessment as well. And it's really worth dipping in and just reminding yourself, we don't want to be caught short. It's always this preparation prior to something happening. We don't want to be in a situation where something comes up and we don't know what to do within the moment. So we prepare to be more robust within a situation. And you've mentioned, Rory, the over-reliance or solely relying on assessment tools. I mean, assessment tools are phenomenal. They really change so much in counselling and psychotherapy, because they kind of put numbers behind the theories and they give us evidence that we can pull at the end of the day, but they're not foolproof. And when we're speaking about somebody potentially taking their own life, it's a really serious topic. With assessments, you might get a false positive, you may get a false negative that comes out from that. And I guess we need to think about the dynamic nature of a client presenting and how they may present. And if I'm thinking about this, I think it needs to be a more personalized and a holistic evaluation that would kind of touch onto frequent monitoring and following up and checking in with the client, detailed inquiry if we do kind of spot that there might be a risk area. And very important here is, I think, and we've spoken about this before, is contextual understanding the context of what has been brought. And I'll give an example of this. You may have a client who might say along the lines of, oh no, this is so horrible, I don't even want to live through this kind of experience that I'm going through at the moment. That does not necessarily mean, even though they've said those words, I do not want to live, does not necessarily mean they are considering taking their own life. It may be just contextual within that interaction. And it's about having that holistic evaluation, detailed inquiry, and checking the context that underlines that. And of course, frequent monitoring if we do recognize that there may be a risk there, Rory.
Absolutely, Ken. And also, I think it's about conceptualizing the client's life, finding out the broader context of client's mental health, their life experience, what's going on for them. Because sometimes, and I've seen this, certainly with friends and people I've known, is that people go through a very, very difficult time in their lives, and one of the ways out of that difficult time is to take their own life. And it may be that once that time has passed, there would be no need for them to take their own life. And it's a kind of working with them in the difficulties they're having, maybe to help them see other options. Because once that time has passed, it may be that, and I've had friends who said that. They said, thank goodness that someone was there to support me, because if I hadn't have had that, I may have taken my own life. And actually now life's pretty good. It was just that situation. Yep. So I also think it's one of those very few times, Ken, where the social model, which is what we work in, it's counselling is a social model, has informed the medical model. Because I think a lot of therapists have been doing this for years. I think a lot of therapists haven't just been going down the tick box route. But I did read with interest when I was doing my research for this piece that there was still, this was driven from the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which is a medical board that oversees good practice in the National Health Service. And it's really interesting that they've took a lot from the counselling psychotherapeutic world, talking about the relationship. And interestingly enough, I read a report the other day that some hospitals still weren't implementing this. So that some hospitals are actually lagging behind and still using kind of questionnaire-based, tool-based assessments. So, I think we need to pat ourselves on the back. I think that it goes to prove that the therapeutic relationship is everything within counselling. It doesn't matter what modality you have. It's the therapeutic relationship and sustaining that and supporting that client in what is, if someone's thinking of taking their own life, what a difficult time that is for someone. Just very, very difficult.
Oh, wow. Yes. So powerful, Rory. I'm at a loss for words as I kind of just contemplate the weight of that. And also the privilege of being able to be there with somebody at that darkest moments. There are very few in life that get the opportunity to be in such a privileged position. But it is also requires us to kind of really be informed and on our game when we are in that privileged position, when we are supporting someone who is sharing those kind of thoughts and with us. And of course, you mentioning that it's about the relationship, and it is, and it's idiosyncratic, as we've said before. In other words, it's different with each individual that presents. One of the things that kind of triggered in my mind as we're talking about this, Rory, and I guess this keys into that personalization and understanding who that client is and doing CPD around your clients and their presentations and who they are. So, for example, if a person is neurodivergent, autistic, I'm going to go to autistic because that was where the research was done, and they suggest that they are thinking of ending their life. The statistical numbers suggest they are more likely to do it because of them being a neurodivergent individual. That's kind of what the numbers are saying. So again, it's looking who is this person and what is their life story and where are they at and how can I better understand that and work with that person. And we've spoken about the kind of the process of kind of identifying that, but of course we need to also focus very much on risk mitigation strategies. So when something does come up, maybe considering a collaborative approach to this and an involvement of support systems around that individual, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the professionalization of therapy. We've now come of age as therapists. We're seen as professional people in our own right. And with that coming of age and being seen as professional people comes added responsibilities. And I think that the idea, I've spoken to some therapists and they've said, well, it's the client's decision and, autonomy. And I think that we need to balance that with what's in the moment and to support the client. I think this is where my thinking goes. Many years ago, I read a report from a coroner's court here in the UK of someone who had to appear in court. It was a therapist, and they were supporting a pregnant woman who was going through a very, very difficult time. And what happened was sadly the woman took her own life and therefore the child. Very, very, very sad, very tragic. And the coroner asked one question to the therapist: what training did you have on working with suicidal pregnant women?
Yeah.
And the answer was none. Yeah. And and I just wouldn't want to be that therapist. I just wouldn't want to be that person, because there's no, with something like this, there's no going back. There's nothing, you can't roll back and, and start again. So I would plead with anybody who's, either worried about talking about suicidal risk to clients or hasn't done any training, just lean into it. Please, please, please just lean into it. And, take the CPD, speak to your supervisor. Yes, it's a scary place to go as a therapist. No one wants to go to that dark place where you're standing on the precipice, literally with the clients as they're making decisions about their own life. But as I always say, the more you know, the less you fear. And by getting that CPD, by working with other professionals and being collaborative and helping yourself understand the best practice of working with clients in this situation, you're going to be the best you can be. And that's what we should be as therapists, the best we can be.
Hear, hear, Rory. Resources and continuous learning, so important. We have created a resource. In fact, Rory has created a resource for you. It's one of Rory's super duper handouts, which contains the information we've spoken about today, but it also has some really useful reading and some organizations that you can look to for that continuing professional development as well. So if you want to get Rory's super duper handout, which is called Detecting and Assessing Suicidality Guidance for Qualified Counselors, you can go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. It's episode 306. It's a free handout that you can take and kind of read over that and have a think about what you're doing in your practice. And as mentioned, if you are a member of the Counselling Tutor CPD library, log in, do a search. You're going to find we have a fair amount of information on this topic and on assessment as well. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, you're wondering what that's all about, just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is right there on the homepage. It's really less than a price of a cup of coffee with a friend per month, and you have access to top CPD from experts within our niche that share their practice and best practice. So that is our ethical, sustainable practice, a sobering topic today, Rory. Mm-hmm. And we move out of that and we go into practice matters. Practice Matters, we shout out and say, is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast, because, Rory, you always find the most interesting of people, invite them along, and they speak about what they're passionate about and what they know in depth. They are in our sector and they are happy to share their information. And you met up with Lesley Simpson-Gray about unmasking neurodivergence and ethnicity using digital tools.
Yes, absolutely. And regular listeners to the podcast will remember Lesley Simpson-Gray because she has delivered other lectures for us, and I've interviewed her before on using Sandbox in online environments. So I like Lesley. I like Lesley because she's a very progressive thinker. And one of the things that we talked about in this interview is how, using digital tools, we unmask both neurodivergence as an identity and also people's ethnicity as an identity to try and better understand ourselves. I spent a lot of time with her, and this is what Lesley had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Identity is becoming a very important part of a lot of people's existence, and understanding their identity and the history of their identity is becoming more and more important for some of us. So I'm delighted to be speaking again to Lesley Simpson-Gray, who has done a fabulous lecture for the CPD Library entitled Unmasking Neurodivergence and Ethnicity Using Digital Tools. So Lesley Simpson-Gray, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me again, Rory. It's great to be here.
So, first of all, just to speak into the point of identity. When you say unmasking neurodivergence and ethnicity, is that a process of acknowledging and separating the two or joining them together? What do we mean by unmasking?
I think there's so many different layers and levels and things that we do to kind of to survive, to get by, to be accepted, to not stand out, and to just feel safe. That it can feel like you're taking off layer after layer after layer to work out who you really are underneath all of that, all of the different coping things that we do that we don't even realize that we do. That's the thing. So it's literally taking off a mask to look in the mirror and think, who am I? And it's okay to be me. Yeah, I think that's a whole process.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess with ethnicity, that's easier to identify because one looks in the mirror. You're a black woman, I'm a white man. Look in the mirror. And for those of us who've got sight, you can see that there's a difference. And how we interact and go out in the world, we will have different experiences regarding our kind of ethnicity. Neurodivergence is something that is a little bit more sometimes hidden. It takes some time for people to realise that they may be neurodivergent. And, you know, does that take a little bit more unmasking? What sort of process is that?
Well, I think to sort of go back to the whole point around ethnicity, even that is just so complex. I took some time out during COVID to do one of those DNA tests, those ancestry tests, to think, okay, yes, when I look in the mirror, I see that I identify as a black woman, but again, who am I?
Yes.
It's sort of those layers of the fact that I'm born and raised in the UK, but my parents and grandparents are from outside of the UK, Caribbean, and where had the generations before them come from? What are the cultural influences that kind of make me who I am, and me as a black woman different from lots of other black women of different ethnicities? So yes, I think that can be really complex in itself. And then on top of that, looking at the experiences of the different ethnic groups, what's in our histories, what then shapes our whole perception about behaviour that just doesn't seem to fit in.
Yes.
And where we are at the time, and the communities and what's acceptable and not, and working out what is sheer weird because it's seen by a particular community in a certain way, as opposed to, well, we define that as autism, or we define that as ADHD, or we define that as sort of social anxiety, or we define that as just different traits. How we understand all of that, it's again layer after layer, how it sort of comes out.
It's like peeling the proverbial onion, isn't it? You just keep peeling away. And it's kind of interesting about acceptance, because certainly over my lifetime, and I will be 66 in a few weeks' time, so I've lived through quite an interesting span of history. Certainly in the UK, we've become a multicultural society, a multi-ethnic society. We moved from that horrible term tolerance, which I heard as like, we have to tolerate people. We have to be tolerant, to acceptance and hopefully welcoming. But it seems that process, it's still an ongoing piece of work, as I'm sure you'll agree. It seems that neurodiversity is lagging behind, and neurodivergence and the kind of neurodivergent identity is something that's emerging. 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have had this conversation. So It's about that fostering that acceptance there, isn't it?
Yes. Well, we've certainly got more language for it now than we had then, which is great because we can have more conversations about it. But I think certainly within the ethnic communities, we bring our own perceptions, I guess, our own perspectives on ill health, mental, physical ill health, and we don't sort of put things in the same sort of terms as we do in a sort of Western view sometimes, but just how we perceive that sort of behaviour and the treatments and things that we would do. And then when you get migration, you get kids moving from one country to another. So certainly in my history, sort of the West Indian community, coming across to the UK, to Europe, bringing those perspectives with us, and then that meeting a very westernised view. And all of those challenges, as you say, around sort of tolerance and intolerance, and how that then becomes behaviour, how that then becomes something that we have to survive. How do we make sense of that? We're only really just, I think, beginning to make sense of that, because it's safer to talk about those sorts of experiences. And I think a younger generation now who will not tolerate the sorts of things that, say, my generation as a sort of Black British would have put up with, would have been sort of silenced about because of, say, my parents and their coping mechanism of like, just accept it, just take it, survive, don't make a fuss, it's dangerous doing that. Well, the generations that are coming now, they're further away from those experiences. They're not accepting it. They are speaking up, which is a great thing. So things are changing, but again, it's that patch of time that really impacts our ability to talk about these things now, and that's the really exciting thing. We've got more of a language and more of an openness, more of a melting pot of experiences that we can begin to talk about and make sense of, which is wonderful.
It's interesting, from the my white British, and I'd say with a highly apostrophised working class background. A majority of my family is neurodivergent, including myself, and I have a grandson who is quite clearly autistic. And it's interesting the reactions that we get in a general community with him, because some people are quite accepting and say, "Oh, that little fellow, he's only 7. He's doing his thing. He's stimming, or he usually tries to steal other people's food, which is kind of if he's not quick, he'll just eat your food. He'll just take it off your plate and put it in his mouth, because to him, he kind of thinks free food, and it's there, so there's those people who are accepting, but those people. Certainly who are not accepting and who see the difference as either threatening or a kind of one step away from an asylum. We've had some interesting experiences that we've had thankfully surrounded by very forward adults who've advocated on his behalf. My daughter is a brilliant advocate for him, and as indeed is her husband. But it is noticeable that there is work to be done there. There is work to be done on the neurodivergence. I'm sure there's work to be done on the ethnicity side. Still a lot. Completely.
Yeah, completely. And can you imagine if that example of sort of grandchild, if that neurodivergent little child, very innocent, but just acting and behaving in a way that comes naturally to was a Black child in a particularly white space, how that would have been perceived? Would anyone have come to a conclusion that Black child may be neurodivergent as opposed to really rude and completely out of order? And that's in some ways an additional challenge within ethnic communities, that sense of being seen as being behavioural problems rather than being seen as a potential neurodivergence problem, certainly within schools. And when you look at the proportion of exclusions and sort of detention and sanctions and things for behavioural problems, and how that comes to the fore for assessments that says actually you've got learning difficulty or you've got neurodivergent in some ways. There's and not only that sort of sense of how we accept that within our own communities.
Yes.
So again, as a family, you've been able to see, generations of it's like, well, yes, we are all got our neurodivergent mix going on and what we recognise and accept within ourselves. But again, some of the ethnic communities, we have a way to go to get to that position. where we can accept.
Yes, that's
neurodivergent.
That's an interesting point, because having done some research regarding the Black experience of neurodivergence, you are quite right. There is a higher incidence of young people being given diagnoses like, defiant personality disorders, and they're just dished out, or they're just seen as trouble causers. They're just seen as trouble causers. The literature is saturated with examples and case studies of that.
It's very disheartening trying to support youngsters to accept their own neurodivergence when their own ethnic communities don't accept it, and neither do other communities.
Yes.
Other spaces and places. So it really is that sense of isolation. I certainly remember growing up not fitting into that sort of cultural archetype of being sort of very well coordinated. My spatial awareness is quite poor at times, and I can learn things quite well eventually, but yeah, I'm not always the most coordinated. So I'm not the sort of cool Black woman who's fabulous at dancing, and I've got quite good musical sort of rhythm.
Sure,
but otherwise, I just don't fit that stereotype. And likewise, my use of language. When I get very stressed, my language becomes more and more formal and quite rigid, and it's just not the way the cool Black woman talks. And so hearing that within their own sort of community, sort of thinking, well, are you trying to be white then? Are you trying to be un-Black then? Are you trying? I'm just being me.
Yes.
But how that was perceived, and which makes it sort of even more challenging to understand your ethnicity. You think, I'm not even like the Black people who I see.
Yes.
Who am I then?
Yes.
Which makes it very, very challenging to accept yourself, let alone make sense of.
Defining that within not only yourself, but in also your experience of your ethnicity and within the community, trying to map that out. And as someone who has a genetic, is genetically not connected to football, who lives in Manchester, I can tell you that I had a really hard time when I was growing up, because no one could understand that anybody who came from Manchester. It was bad enough that I wasn't either a United supporter or a City, but to support neither of them, heresy. Absolute heresy. I would have got a better deal if I'd have been a Liverpool supporter. I really do.
Oh yeah, something football, but not no football. What's that about?
Not football, dear me.
You're not allowed to be part of the tribe. You're not allowed to be part of. People around you. There's no acceptance. That's sort of like you're weird in a way that we just don't accept. We can't begin to understand you.
Yeah. I know nothing about cars either. So, I mean, that's just me done, really. So,
yeah.
So your lecture, we've kind of talked about neurodivergence and ethnicity, but the digital tools piece, how does that come in, and how does that help the client?
I think the freedom to explore in a way which is safe and safe to be seen. I think that's, for me, certainly my experience of using digital tools, not just for my clients in my practice, but for my own experience. And I think so much of what I sort of talk about now is because I've had to sort of map out for myself, what do these tools mean for me?
Yes.
As well as clients. So I think certainly when we start looking at sort of video games, and I think we're sort of fairly well aware of the benefits, certainly for the autistic community, of having a way to practice those social skills and to have a space that feels safer than sometimes the sort of the real world in terms of social relationships. But taking it that one step further, looking at vast injustices, looking at the real disparities that happen within sort of some of those online spaces, those online environments and characters, and being able to give those characters a voice, particularly sort of those marginalised ones, those ones that are right on the edge. And so finding characters that we can relate to, that really speak up and speak into those sort of positions of being very, just completely marginalised, and finding that power. They're a very, very powerful thing within some of the online games. In addition to some of the creative tools, I use VR quite a bit in my practice. So again, finding those spaces where you can embody the art, you can get into it, you can see it from a completely different perspective, and that whole process of taking art that I produced during my training days when I was training to become a psychotherapist, and a real struggle, a real challenging time, a real challenging experience, again being able to accept myself within a very different space, which couldn't make sense of me. But some of the art that helped me to think about those experiences then, and taking those and putting those into a VR environment, really helped me to make sense of like some very fragmented experiences, like shards of colour and light, but to be able to put it into a whole new dimension, a whole new perspective, was amazing. And I'm really excited about a whole field of hip hop therapy, music, movement, art, graffiti, done in a way that's very connecting online, using digital music, using ways of giving a language and a story and a voice to so many experiences. You see a whole generation of Black autistic youngsters using some very tried and tested methods, ways, culturally appropriate ways of using electronic music and dance and art to express their voice, their language, their way of seeing the world, their way of identifying, saying this is me in a culturally appropriate way, but in a way that helps you to see that and to join me. That's the thing. It's not just a protest thing that says, look, here I am, be afraid.
Yeah.
It says, I want you to join me in that language and in that place. So bringing those sorts of things into my practice, making those sorts of tools available as a way of healing, as a way of communicating an identity, and again, very appropriate, culturally appropriate way, is really exciting stuff.
I'm just listening to you. I'm really knocked out by the kind of forward thinking of this. This is ploughing definitely the new ground. It's a very exciting for me development. And I think what I'm hearing is the contrary to the therapy we know, where the therapist invites the client into their space, with the virtual space, almost the client is inviting you into their space.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, totally. And being able to see that together, it's really exciting working with more game developers and tool developers who recognize, well, if I put a certain environment in this digital space, in the virtual world, how do I know that it represents your view of the world? How do I know that even? It's what I can see. That's what I visualize. Yes. I put it here. What do you see and visualize? How does the world look like for you and your autistic self as well?
Yes.
So yes, you really begin to co-create that, and you take away the guesswork from, I wonder if this is what you're seeing, to like, yeah, we both see it now. It's wonderful.
I like that, taking away the guesswork. We always talk about co-created relationships in therapy, but you never hear, I don't hear so often, co-created environments. And it sounds like, you're taking this one step further. You're co-creating a relationship, but you're co-creating the environment that it exists in.
Yes, it's takes, I think, a lot of acceptance of ourselves to be able to then offer that to our clients, sense of what we know, but so that we don't know, that we're happy to sit with, happy to explore still with, and in the workshop that I've just done, we talk about sort of safe crossing on sort of dangerous intersections. Sometimes it does feel very dangerous with so much traffic and so many different intersections and layers and history and things that we don't know. But can we sit with our clients in those very busy spaces? And help them to get to a place where it feels safe to cross and know what that experience feels like. We use those digital tools to sort of help us to both be in those spaces and to be supportive to our clients as they make sense of it all as well. So that's the challenge.
The therapist harnessing their inner explorer to kind of act in face of known fears and to look at themselves and say, can I go into this co-created space, and how will I be in this co-created space? So it's a definite huge development on what I would call traditional therapeutic engagement. It really is. It sounds to me like an exciting series of developments, and the work you're doing is incredibly exciting. I wonder, just as a final question, what would you hope that people took away from the lecture that you gave us?
I would hope that people get a sense of the real people that therapists are, that we have our journeys, our stories, our challenges. It's not been very long that it's been safe to even say I'm a neurodivergent professional who works to support mental health. That's changed. That's really exciting. So knowing that we are real people, and that the more real we can be for ourselves, the more we can accept and support and help our clients to be their real selves. I think it takes that courage to unmask ourselves and to be very genuine, to be able to help our clients do that. And it's a wonderful time to do that. We've got some amazing tools. So yes, jump in, give it a go and explore, but be yourself, and then fully embrace your clients on a journey to do that. That's what I'd hope people would take away.
Well, Unmasking Neurodivergence and Ethnicity Using Digital Tools is available in the Counsellor CPD library. Now it's a really important lecture, and one that really, as I said earlier in the interview, ploughs new ground. So it just really gives me the opportunity to say, Lesley Simpson-Gray, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to our guest, Lesley Simpson-Gray, and to you, Rory, finding the right people, the right topics, and holding those interviews. So appreciate that. If you enjoyed what Lesley Simpson-Gray had to say and you want to see more of that topic, there is a lecture in the Counselling Tutor CPD library. And if you're not a member of that, just go to counsellingtutor.com. The information's there, or log in and you can have a look at that lecture. And there are, as Rory said in the intro to this interview, a number of lectures from Lesley Simpson-Gray, including one on working with Sandbox, which is interesting as well. Make sure you check that one out. So that is our Practice Matters. We now move on to Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're going to speak about tutor feedback, but we're flipping it on its head, Rory. We're not speaking about the tutor giving us as students feedback. We're talking about you giving feedback to your tutors. Tell us more, Rory.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, when we taught every year, at about kind of May time, our manager would come in and give us a vanilla envelope. Sounds all very undercover, this, doesn't it? A vanilla envelope, A4 vanilla envelope. And it would have a document in which we give to each of the students that we taught. and they would log in and it would give instructions on how to give feedback, and they would give feedback. We'd usually take them to the Learning Resource Centre where the computers were. We would go and get a cup of tea and leave the students to it, and then in a couple of days' time, our manager would come to us and share the feedback. It's really important. I think that sometimes we forget just how important our course takers' feedback is, because they're on the receiving end of our ideas. When we construct a course, I speak for myself, but we do it with the best of intentions. But sometimes just getting a second sight on that and how people experience it is really good. And let's face it, every other profession, every other industry gets feedback from their customers. If you buy a car, someone has given feedback on that before it's finally gone into production. Or if you buy a chocolate bar, or you go on holiday or something like that, someone will have given feedback. So feedback, as I always say, is the breakfast of champions. And it's the breakfast of champions, feedback. And it's very, very useful. But interestingly enough, I did detect in our Facebook page, and if you want to become a member of our Facebook group, Facebook Counselling Tutor, log in and you'll see all these conversations. And one particular thread was a bit of concern about giving the feedback. And I would say don't be concerned, because you cannot act on what you do not know. And I think if someone doesn't like feedback, then I think that there's an area of personal development right there, isn't it? Yeah. We should be open to feedback. I mean, not all feedback's helpful, and some feedback you might think, well, I mean, not think that's useful. But generally speaking, if there's themes that come up, if one person says something, you might go, okay, look, that's interesting. But if 3, 4, or 5 people say that, then you pretty much know there's a theme there, and that's something that might need addressing. So don't be frightened of giving your tutors feedback, and ask for it to be anonymized. If you're concerned, just ask for it to be anonymized. I think most feedback should be anonymous, Ken.
Yeah, very much so. And if you're unsure of how to give that feedback, you can ask your tutor and say, if I have any kind of feedback, is there a process or way that I can do that, and find out how that can be handed in. Just going back to what you started with, Rory, of the how helpful feedback is. So in Counselling Tutor, we build training. We build training for counsellors that are already qualified in specialist areas. So online and telephone working, becoming a clinical supervisor, trauma-informed practice. We're at the moment working on a training for neurodivergence. And one of the things we do is ask for feedback after every single session. Every session we ask for feedback, and all of that feedback is taken by our academic team, and they pore over that feedback, and they're looking for those themes. They're looking for what are a number of people kind of mentioning and saying that they would rather have. What are they saying that they like? What are they saying they don't like? What are we missing? And then our training is adapted according to that feedback. So our training is audience directed in that way, and good training should be. That's why a tutor should and probably would be open to feedback, because it only improves the learning outcomes at the end of the day. So it is useful, really, really useful, and should be welcomed. And most organizations should have a mechanism for you getting that feedback in. And I think back to being in offices and things like that, Rory, where you'd have a feedback box or a comments box where you could write something on a little paper and pop it in. That was one way. So it is a common way of asking for feedback. I think one of the things that came up for me in this is incongruence is the word I'm going to go to. And incongruence is when you are feeling one thing inside, but outside you'll show something completely different. So I'm going to use the example of sitting at a restaurant and the food is delivered and it's really not right. It's undercooked, it's undersalted or oversalted or whatever it may be. You're not really happy with this food that you're eating. And a few moments later, somebody will breeze past the table and say, "Everything okay?" incongruence is looking, grinning through clenched teeth and go, yeah, it's fine, thank you very much, but inside you go, I'm not coming back here again. And I guess congruence comes with a little bit of courage where, if we're going to be giving feedback, it does require us to look inside, find that courage and be congruent and and kind of share how it really is for us. And as long as that is not kind of just giving feedback out to hurt somebody, you're doing it to help them to be able to help you or the rest of the group, then congruence is kind of sought in those moments, Rory. But it's challenging, isn't it, to give that kind of feedback, specifically if you feel a little bit nervous about it or wary.
It is. There's always a power imbalance, I think, in training. And, I think that feedback does rebalance that to some extent, and also be thoughtful on the kind of feedback you give. Many years ago, when I worked in further education, we had a box on the wall, and it was the student feedback box. It looked like a letterbox, a very small letterbox, and students were encouraged to put a little piece of feedback on a piece of paper into the letterbox, and then every day we'd open it and see what was in. And one day we opened it and there was one piece of paper, so we all thought, this is terribly exciting, and we all opened it up and someone had written, and I quote, "Can you put a box on the wall for feedback?" Yes.
Whoops.
And while it was highly amusing, we all had a good belly laugh at that. It wasn't very useful. We spent a lot of time putting this up, and what we got was, we like a bit of humour. We all thought it was very, very funny. However, when you're giving feedback, constructive feedback,
yes,
using examples, for example, and also just maybe share a little bit of your own process with that, and just share what was going on for you. And I think certainly in education, students will always nod. In my experience, we say everybody got that, and students will nod, and that some of them are nodding and they haven't got it. And a good tutor will say, "Okay, well, just tell me a little bit about A, B, and C," and you test the level of knowledge. So I think that it's really important that when you do give feedback, it's constructive, and you give clear examples of maybe what went really well and what might be more useful. And that makes it so that when the tutor gets all the feedback, if everybody's done that, you've got a very, very clear roadmap of what you need to change. If you just give feedback and said, I didn't like that lesson, it was rubbish, then there's nothing to work with. There's nothing to work with. So you need to be precise and give quite granular examples, and that is useful. And tutors should thank you for it.
Oh, very much so. And I think what you're doing there, Rory, is distinguishing between a complaint and feedback. That was a rubbish lesson. I didn't learn anything. That's a complaint. I'm complaining about that lesson. There is nothing useful other than, okay, that didn't work for that person. Within that kind of feedback is saying, I really liked today's lecture. I found it very interesting, but I found the PowerPoint's a little bit word heavy, and I could have done with a handout that had the main points on it. So you've said a positive, loved the topic. You've said what your challenge was, word heavy slide. And then you've said what would have matched for you, having a handout that had the main points on it. That is constructive feedback, because it gives the person delivering that in this hypothetical example, information of what works, what doesn't work, and what can be done to make a change for that. So just giving a negative does not work. And of course, when we're speaking about feedback, feedback is not always a negative process. Feedback can be, I really liked today's lecture. I loved how you used the video. I'd love to see more of those because it really keys into my learning style. That is 100% positive feedback, but it is still feedback that is useful to the person that is kind of receiving that.
Absolutely. So if you get an opportunity to give feedback, now you know how to do it. And I actually reminded Ken that in our counselling study resource library, which is our library for students, we have a number of lectures on giving feedback. We do. And it's useful because no one actually teaches you how to give feedback. I mean, that's something that's just come into my mind. It's, when people say, "Can you give me feedback?" How do you structure it? What is needed? Now, sometimes, certainly at the college, they would give very structured ways of giving it. They would ask specific questions. But if it's just a general question, sometimes people need help with that. So, if that's something that's interests you, or you want help with any other resources, theory, ethics, skills-based practice, counselling study resource has lots of stuff in there to help you with that, especially on how to give feedback.
Indeed, yes. And you speaking about feedback, I guess we want to learn to give feedback, specifically if we're doing skills practice.
Yeah.
If we're working in a triad, part of that process is giving feedback. I know CPCAB courses, they teach how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. And as Rory has just said, we definitely have in our counselling study resource, we've got lectures on feedback. If you're a member of Counselling Study Resource, just log in, do a search for the term feedback, and you'll see those resources. If you're not a member and you're wondering what is this resource library, well, it's a massive library of resources for students of counselling and psychotherapy, and it covers lectures and resources on the topics that you study during your formal training. And you can get more information on that by going to counsellingtutor.com. It's right there on the home page. And that is kind of today's student services. And of course, this has been the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you've been listening to episode 306.
Absolutely. And we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, detecting suicidality, essential guidance for counsellors. And don't forget, there is a handout for that. Episode 306, Counselling Tutor. Go to the podcast tab, look for episode 306, and that handout's available for you. We moved on to Practice Matter, where we spoke to Lesley Simpson-Gray, where she's talked about a great lecture she's done for the CPD library, unmasking neurodivergence and ethnicity using digital tools. And then finally, Student Services, giving your tutors feedback. We talked about how to give feedback and why it's essential for any enterprise to be able to grow and become more efficient. So finally, before you leave us today, if you found the topics that we've discussed useful, why not leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform like other people have? And for those people, we thank you very much. It's a real privilege to come along with you on your journey of counselling, and we really appreciate your ears and the time it takes to listen in to your podcast, our podcast. And if possible, if you could share it, if the topics today have been useful and have touched you, why don't you share it with your peers and put it on your social medias so that other people can hear what you have heard and maybe get benefit from it too. We're truly grateful to everybody who listens in. So until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.